Well, good morning, everyone. It's just past 11 o'clock. Thank you for everybody's attendance. We have a number of people that we're going to present today, just in terms of giving more information, which is what this is all about. So this is our second Business Owners Strategy Forum that we conducted. We conducted one last Friday, and we had great feedback about that. And what this is really all about is really helping business owners right now in this very, very difficult time to connect, share, support, strategize and implement. And that's fundamentally our role and what we would like to do in terms of our responsibility to the business owners to help them navigate through some of the complexity of what's going on. And I think collectively we're all a lot stronger together than we are if we're all trying to do this ourselves, and it can become a pretty lonely and isolated existence, especially at the moment where we're all sort of trying to navigate through the complexity of making decisions in our business. So really today and every week, this forum really is very much about providing everyone with information, sharing and supporting each other. So today I've got two speakers that are going to talk firstly about the government stimulus packages that have been announced this week, and also I've got an expert on in workplace law, which we're all sort of grappling with at the moment, given what we're trying to do with our labour forces. So they're the topics that we're going to speak about for the next 30 minutes. And then after that, we'll have open forum chat for half an hour around sort of asking questions for those panellists, but also just to talk about any other issues that we might have. And we'll also talk about the forum channel that we've actually got now open, that people can join, where in between these sessions we'll be posting information and chatting and supporting each other in regards to information and just knowledge share. So that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about today. So really, that's what we're grappling with. What will be the impact of coronavirus? And last week, just as a bit of a recap, we spoke about, what do you do in uncertain times? And we went through a number of things around, the strategy with people, making sure that you're getting as much data as you can, cash flow planning, strategy and scenario planning, making sure that we're all connected in this very isolated world that we're currently living in, and making sure that we're protecting our assets, especially around the IT front, because we are now more exposed given the fact that we're all working remotely. So that was the topics we discussed last week. What we're going to talk about today, as I said, is the government stimulus. So getting more detail around that, because we've had announcements and now we're getting more detail. We're going to talk about workplace law in a very difficult climate, and then we'll open up for forum discussions and questions. So just wanting to make sure that we understand that. I'm very conscious of everybody's time. There's going to be a lot of content that we'll get through in the first half an hour, but then we have the opportunity to really ask questions and also get some clarity in relation to that. So without further ado, we're going to get into it. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to introduce you to Matt Smith. So Matt Smith is one of our partners in Prime, and he is going to talk to you about the government stimulus and some of the sort of the detail behind that. So welcome, Matt. Thank you for joining us this morning, and I'll hand it over to you in terms of sharing your screen with some slides that you've got just from a visual prompt perspective. So thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Morning, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. I just want to check that everybody can see that.
I can see that. Yep. Hopefully everybody else can.
Great. Please let us know if you can't. And also, I'm conscious this morning of my microphone, so if at any stage you can't hear me, please let me know, and I'll try and continue to speak up.
Yep. So Matt, it is a bit muffled, just to let you know. So just if you can, probably
move a bit closer. No worries. Just means you're going to have to see my ugly mug a little bit more.
That's all right. It's only small.
So in terms of the government stimulus, there's been a couple of rounds of this. There was an initial one on the 12th of March, which was then expanded last Sunday, which I'm sure many people would have seen. In addition to the federal stimulus, there's been some state-based items, which we probably won't go through in a heap of detail today, but we will touch on that at the end. So in terms of the federal stimulus, we've sort of split it out into a couple of categories, and we'll focus today mainly on the business and SME side of things, which I think is where, given this is a business owners forum, where we should be focusing. And as you can see there, the key areas for business have been.
You need to, sorry, Matt, if you're on a different slide, you just need to share because it didn't go to the next slide for some reason.
Okay, so
just stop share and then reshare. It obviously didn't pick up the change of screen. Sorry about that.
How's that?
The fun of the technology. There we go. We're on the second screen now. Being federal stimulus.
Yeah, that's right. So I mentioned there, it's been split out into both the business and I guess individuals. We'll focus mainly on the SME side of things today, and the main one there that everyone has been on everyone's lips has been around the cash flow boost. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that is, give a couple of examples on how it works and how to access it and the timing of it. The SME guarantee scheme, which is a new one that was announced on Sunday, which is in and around new unsecured loans for up to $250,000 that the government is going to work with the banks on. We're waiting on a bit more information there. Instant asset write-off and accelerated depreciation, what those benefits are. ATO relief in respect of both payments and, in some cases, lodgements. And then apprentices and trainees and targeted support. So, did that screen update change, Matt?
It's up to cash flow boost now, Matt.
Yeah, great. So as announced on Sunday, that the cash flow boost is in and around SMEs and not-for-profits that employ people. So the whole idea of this particular stimulus is to ensure that we are keeping our people employed for as long as possible and with as much continuity as possible. So this cash flow boost is now up to 100,000, which is up from the original 25,000 that was announced. And what it actually is accessing or returning 100% of your PAYG withholding up to a maximum of 50K. Now, when I say a maximum of 50K, that is for the period for BASs lodged from the March 20 period to the June 20 period. We'll go through an exercise on what that actually means in a second. But for any of those employers who are employing, whether they're withholding $0 right up to large employers, there's going to be a minimum payment of $10,000 that will be remitted, and that is up from $2,000, which was in the original stimulus as well. Those payments, those payments are going to come in the form of a credit on your ATO account. So there's been a bit of confusion and a few phone calls with my client base in and around people calling this a cash boost. It's not necessarily a cash injection boost. What it is a cash flow boost. So we've been using the example of an employee that would normally cost you $10,000 per month. $3,000 of that might be withholding. So you'd pay $7,000 to your employee and $3,000 to the ATO. Effectively, the cost of that employee is now going to be $7,000, all things being equal, because the ATO will remit that $3,000 of withholding. So those payments, if they do form refunds, will start from April 28. And that's so naturally we're expecting that everyone's going to be pretty keen to be getting their March BASs lodged pretty swiftly into the new month. But those refunds may not start travelling through in and around this cash flow boost until the end of April. So once we work out between the March and June 20 period how much of that $50,000 we've been able to access as a business, there will then be an additional payment equal to that initial portion of $50,000 that will be made available for the period of the June BAS to the September BAS, which is will be paid, if applicable, as a refund from July 28. And this applies to all businesses with an aggregated annual turnover of under $50 million. So I'm not sure, Matt, if you're monitoring hands up or questions, but I'll just push through to an example.
Yeah, so the way what we'll do is that we'll actually have questions at the end. So we'll be actually doing sort of, we'll push through the content of the presenters for the next sort of period of time, because some people want to sort of get through some content, and then it allows us to have some questions and after that. So please keep your questions running through. I will then obviously moderate that and promote you to presenter, or alternatively just read the questions for you. So we just keep going through the content, Matt.
Great. So you can see the cash flow boost example there, Matt?
Yep.
Great. So this is an example of a hairdresser salon. Obviously that's fairly topical given some of the feedback that has happened this week. But it's an example of a business that employs 12 people with an average salary of $50,000 per year. And that business withholds $8,788 for their employees on a monthly basis. So working through that as a practical example and how that would work, effectively when the March BAS is lodged, this is a monthly lodger. So they would have already lodged their January and February IASs before this point, you would imagine, before this was announced on Sunday, maybe not. But regardless, the January and February lodgements are irrelevant for the purposes of calculating the cash flow boost in this instance. So the March BAS or IAS would be lodged, and that $8,788 of PAYG would be payable. Because they're a monthly lodger, the benefit received for this March month would be 300% of the March lodgement, which effectively covers the January and February period, regardless of if those numbers were slightly different. And so a credit of $26,364 will hit your ATO account upon lodgement of this March BAS. Now, if the GST for that period was, let's call it $10,000 net payable, then you would and all other debts were up to date, you would effectively then therefore have a credit of $16,364 that would be on your ATO account. And what we're saying is that would be refunded to you after April 28, which is when the government have announced they will start that refund process, regardless of when that March BAS is lodged. But obviously we're encouraging you to get them lodged as soon as possible. Because this example is a monthly lodger, there would then be an April IAS lodged with $8,788 of PAYG, which would be recognised and then credited straight away. Further amount of $8,788 in May, which would be recognised upon lodgement and credited straight away, which would only leave then for the June lodgement an amount of $6,060 left to take them up to the full $50,000 cap. So I mentioned before that the second lot of $50,000 related to both the June and September periods. So because in the June period we've now exhausted the full $50,000, the amount for this taxpayer is $50,000, so they're entitled to the full $50,000 as long as they're still trading and lodging BASs post that period. So they will get the second $50,000 automatically, effectively, as long as they're trading on, and that will be paid in 25% or based on the lodgements. So starting at June, they would get 25% of that extra 50,000 as well as the 6,000 upon lodgement of the June BAS. And then for July, August and September, they would receive the remaining 75% of the extra 50,000 upon lodgement of those IASs. So if we think about that practically in July, if the IAS is still only 8,788, there would be a credit available there, which would be able to be refunded, assuming all other amounts have been paid.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. Probably just moving on to the next stuff so we can just make sure
keep moving. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
I just thought I'd go through that in detail because a lot of clients have been asking.
Right, just conscious of making sure we get through some content today.
Sure. Okay, so we did talk about the new unsecured loans up to $250,000, the SME guarantee scheme. I think, Matt, you've got plans to cover that in next week's session once we get a bit more detail from the banks, and they're still finalising their policies on that one.
Exactly right, yep.
Yep. So we'll move on to the next one, instant asset write-off. And this one is around allowing businesses to immediately write off their eligible assets. This was in the original stimulus. The threshold has jumped from 300 to 150 with, again, an annual turnover for this one of up to 500 million. So I think they said that over 99% of businesses in Australia would be eligible for this one. The instant asset, so that instant asset is just until June 20. I don't think people are rushing out to spend money on assets at this point in time. However, if you did have in your window that you needed, that you were looking at a purchase between sort of in the next 12 to 18 months, there may be some tax advantages in bringing that forward. But naturally, you would need to look at your cash flows to ensure that was a responsible thing to be doing. Then the second bit to that is an accelerated depreciation. So any items outside of that instant asset write-off are now also doubled the depreciation rates until June 21.
And both of those things really do reduce your taxable income. Therefore, the tax benefit is it reduces the tax payable. So that's the benefit of those two items.
That's right. So we touched on at the start some ATO relief. The government is offering administrative relief in terms of tax obligations, including deferring payments for up to 4 months. So if you really are struggling to meet your obligations, if we go back to the previous example where the March 20 BAS was lodged and we were getting a credit of 26,000. If our GST liability was actually 30,000 for that period, and our cash flow was such that we couldn't pay the balance of the 4,000, we could actually go to the ATO and ask for, an extension on terms to pay that. And then there are some extra items in and around apprentices and trainees and targeted support. We won't go into that too much here, but if you are interested in that and you do have apprentices and trainees, please reach out and we can have a bit of a chat.
Cool.
In the interest of time, Matt,
Yeah, so just in regards to the slides, what we've also done, we're posting these on our workplace channel that we'll talk about giving everybody access to. Because this is more of a forum, I thought it would be good to just focus on the business elements of it. There's obviously federal stimulus around the individuals. I've asked Matt to include those into the slides as well, which will be published as well. So just in the interest of time, we won't go through those, but if you just flick through your slides there, Matt, you'll see that he's also summarised some state-based stimulus that we've got some detail on, and we have been writing notes and emails nearly every day this week out to our clients to let them know as it comes through some of the state-based relief as well. So once again, we'll publish all that, but just wanted to sort of give you a bit of an update as to what's available, how the detail works. And we'll obviously open it up because I've already got a few questions, so we'll open it up for question time after we hear from them because there's some questions around workplace law already. So Matt, if I can get
I'll
you
stop the share. Yep.
Stop share, but that presentation, Matt, that's fantastic. Really appreciate that, and obviously we'll keep publishing data as it comes, information as it comes through. But that was a really good, because what's happening is that there's high level policy coming out, but we're now seeing the detail, and that's good to go through some of that detail. Thanks very much for that, Matt.
Pleasure.
So now I'm going to go on talking about other very relevant topics right now, being workplace laws. So I've got an invited guest, being Stephen Schoninger, who actually is a special counsel at HFW Legal or Lawyers, and he's got a presentation around some of the things that are on everybody's lips at the moment in terms of how do we deal with our labour force right now in these really difficult, uncertain times, and being responsible as we are as business owners for our people. So I'll hand it over to you, Stephen, in terms of sharing your screen, if that's okay, to go through some of the slides.
Now?
Yep.
Okay, everyone can hopefully see that now. Is that all being shared okay?
Yes, I can see that, mate.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much, Matt. I'm an employment lawyer at HFW, as Matt said. I want to take you through a high-level overview of the options that are available. These are unprecedented times. There is a lot of change happening very fast for a lot of businesses. You do have options as business owners, a range of options, and I want to take you through those. In terms of looking for guidance, outside of seeking specific legal advice, a lot of the government sites are publishing really good quality resources that I'd encourage you to look at if you're interested in safety or safety issues where you are still operating, or in terms of guidance on employment law stuff. The Fair Work Ombudsman has a lot of great information. The first issue from a workplace law point of view, and this is really for those of you who are continuing to be trading at this point in time and haven't yet been impacted by the government directions to close down, is that where you've still got people coming to work and customers coming into the workplace, suppliers and so forth, you need to be thinking from a safety perspective of your obligations to provide a safe place of work. Really, at this time, what you want to be thinking about is what is the likelihood and consequence of infection among workers in my workplace, and what control measures can I put in place reasonably to eliminate or at least minimise that risk. It's going to be the classic stuff of sharing information with people about all the medical guidance of washing your hands and coughing into your elbow and maintaining distance. All of that sort of stuff is going to be a minimum. The World Health Organization, if you go to their website, has published packs for employers that include posters you can print off and put up in the workplace to be reminding people about all these basics. So that's a really simple measure you can do. Encouraging people who are sick to obviously stay away, requiring them to, I would say, in these circumstances. So in all cases, talk to your people, think about the realities on the ground for your particular business, and put in place the measures you think are most appropriate. From moving on to the employment law perspective and getting into the rights in terms of businesses where you're suffering the downturn, where you haven't already been forced to close, the key thing is to know what your employee's particular rights are. So dig out of the drawer, and if you've got an enterprise agreement, dig that out. Are your employees covered by a modern award? Dig out the contracts. What workplace policies do you have in place? If you're seeking advice, those are going to be the things that people are going to need to be looking at to be able to advise on the parameters of the options available to you. Look at those yourself to get a good idea of what's going on. Okay, so that's sort of the background framework. I want to get into the meat of the realities of the options and what it means, and you know what means what effectively. Where you have an employee who's been self-quarantined by law, so the people who have recently come back from overseas or who have been exposed to known risks, where the government has said you must stay at home, in those circumstances, you as the employer do not have to pay the employee where they have been directed to stay home by the government. So that's that. And that is because they're not ready, willing and able to work, not able because of the government order, which is law. People who are at home, who need some income, may well be asking you if they can access their paid leave entitlements, and you can absolutely give people access to their paid leave to enable them to have some money coming in during a time where they are quarantined by law. If somebody is actually sick, they can take sick leave. Another category, and these are probably becoming less relevant as time moves on and we all seem to be heading towards much tighter close downs, but you may not have employees who have been quarantined by the government, but you might, as the employer, have a very reasonable safety concern that causes you to say, Joe Bloggs, you need to stay home from work. I don't think you can safely come to work because you were exposed to someone who was exposed to someone, and I think it's a bit too much of a risk in the current circumstances. If you are, as the employer, requiring people to stay, and that is because, assuming that they aren't actually sick, they are rocking up at your door to do their work, ready, willing and able to work. And the law says that as an employer, you have to provide them with that work and let them work. So where you are making the decision to send people home, you will have to pay people for that time, unless of course they're actually sick, when you'll still have to pay them, but it will be their sick leave. So there's an important distinction there between government ordered quarantine and you making very sensible and reasonable safety decisions. If you are in a situation where you're not in one of the industries that have already been directed to close their doors, but times are obviously tough for the rest of business, and you're thinking that a temporary closure might be appropriate, there are close down provisions in the Fair Work Act, which is the Australian employment law, which allows a business to close down for a specified relatively short period of time. It's the law that allows people to close their doors over the Christmas New Year period, which we're probably quite familiar with. I've had a number of clients who are looking and will actually be doing a close down over Easter, which is coming up in a few weeks, or I'm not exactly sure of the dates, but I know it's very close. And so you could maybe look to that period if you're looking to do a temporary short-term closure, give people as much notice as possible. If you've got award covered people, there will be notice periods that are specific to your particular industry, so look at those. But basically you can require people to take their annual leave for that close down period. You can potentially allow them or have them take unpaid leave if they don't have enough annual leave accrued to cover the period of the close down, if you've got a pre-existing right to do that. So that would need to come from a contract, or maybe an enterprise agreement or award may allow you to do that. You can't unilaterally force one of your employees to take unpaid leave. But of course, you could also have a conversation with the employee, and if you can get them to agree to take leave in these extraordinary circumstances, then that's fine, but that you need agreement on that front. But this is one option, which I suppose is more of an interim, shorter term option for businesses who need to just shut things down for a short period of time, not thinking months and months, more in the terms of maybe a couple of weeks to try and take stock. This next one, stand down, is the big one, and this is what you'll be, I'm sure, all hearing on the news every 5 minutes. This is where, in very limited circumstances, and in 15 years of practice as an employment lawyer, I've never had this be triggered before in my career. It's that rare of an issue. But you may stand down workers without pay in circumstances that are in the 3 dot points in the middle of this slide, where you've got someone who can't usefully be employed in their substantive job or doing any other work that is meaningful in the business. And they can't work because of a stoppage of work, and that stoppage is caused by something completely outside of your control. So in terms of the industries that we have already seen be ordered by the government to close their doors in recent weeks, that is classic stand down territory. A stoppage of work really critically, doesn't mean a downturn in business. So where you're not yet ordered to close, you can't stand down your employees without pay, unless there is some other stoppage at work. So a stoppage means a physical barrier or a legal barrier in the case of the government directions to close in the current climate. That means that the work just cannot be done. And so the stand downs that you're seeing on the news are being implemented because by law, I can't open my doors, therefore my employees can't work, and therefore I can stand them down without pay. The caveat on that is going to be if you're in a business where people can work from home, then those people can still usefully be employed and still do their jobs. But if people are not in jobs that permit them to do their work from home, this is the big option, which is really the last resort short of redundancy, where the employment would be terminated. The purpose of these laws is to recognise that something completely unexpected might happen, a la coronavirus, that is causing, where the government has ordered doors to close, a stoppage of work, and therefore we hope that we're all going to rise from the ashes sooner rather than later. In the meantime, we can stand our people down. We don't have the cost, the payroll cost in those circumstances. Those employees can then access Centrelink, as the government has announced, so they can go on to the job seeker payments and receive all those additional payments that have been announced, but the business isn't incurring the cost of payroll effectively. So that's the sort of the option if you are one of those businesses where doors have had to close. Stand down is what you do, and that is a direction to people that they are stood down without pay because of the government direction, and that's the step short of redundancy. If, which is the next slide, redundancy is really if the business will be closing down completely, or you are in a situation where you do need to permanently be shedding positions. That is a classic redundancy scenario. And so where you no longer require the job, you would be consulting with your employee, looking to any alternatives, such as redeployment, which is probably going to be practically quite unlikely in the current climate, depending on your particular business. And that if there is no other option available, redundancy would be the outcome. An interesting point in this concept is that with consultation, you need to be looking at ways to reduce or minimise the impact of a potential redundancy on the worker. One way you could agree to do that, which is basically the same practically as a stand down, is to agree to take unpaid leave for an indefinite period throughout the coronavirus crisis, if you think that there's a chance that everything will be able to pick up again at the back end of this. If that's obviously not going to be an option if you are closing your doors permanently now, or the job is absolutely not going to be required, but that could be an interim measure. And from the research that people in our team have been doing and looking into this in terms of Centrelink options for individuals in these circumstances, someone who, the position seems to be that someone who is on unpaid leave, where there is a defined period of leave and no opportunity to come back from that leave during that period, should be able to access the Centrelink benefits that are being extended to people in this climate. So that's another option, but really I think you'd probably be more likely using the stand down scenario in that case, and redundancy is really for those who do unfortunately have to go on a permanent basis. Sorry, Matt.
I was just going to say, so just in the interest of time, just looking at, you just gone into some other practical solutions. So if we just get through those, and then we've got a fair few questions that are being raised at the moment. So sorry about that. I know there's lots of content information.
Oh, absolutely. And this was the last slide that I wanted to just talk to very quickly. Been very happy to field any questions. The takeaway is that, there's a lot of options legally, and I've given you sort of the high level headlines. And the ones that I've taken you through are really the headlines when you're taking unilateral action as the employer. Discussion and consultation and agreement introduces a lot of flexibility. In the current climate, you can absolutely be talking to your people and working out whatever practical solution is working for your business and for your troops to get people through this crisis. You're going to be able to do most of it. So options like taking leave at half pay might be really attractive for some people where we're still trading. I need to reduce hours. I need to, from a business point of view, you're also reducing your accrued leave liabilities. If someone has 4 weeks annual leave accrued, you can agree that they take 8 weeks of annual leave at half pay. That gives the employee the benefit, obviously, of a longer period of cash coming in. Net, it's the same amount of money for the business, but it gives that employee the sort of, at least the psychological benefit of that leave coming in. You can agree to reduce people's rate of pay. Obviously, not everyone is the CEO of a major corporation who can take their $1 million salary down to, several $100,000. But anybody can agree to reduce their salary, provided that you aren't going below your applicable award rates. That may be an option for some people. You can agree to reduce, and you can agree that people would take periods of unpaid leave. You can force that, as I said, in a stand-down situation. But if you're just trying to manage stuff on a day-to-day basis and keep the doors open, any of these combinations, and there will be many more options, basically whatever you can come up with commercially is most likely going to be doable, provided you keep in mind your baselines of the minimum wage and applicable award conditions that set those baselines. The final point is watch the Fair Work Commission website for any changes made to your applicable modern award. The Hospitality Industry Award, which is for hotels and obviously, etc., was varied by the Commission a couple of days ago to introduce specific temporary flexibilities for the hospitality industry. There are currently a range of applications before the Fair Work Commission to temporarily vary other modern awards, similarly to introduce new flexibilities specifically to deal with COVID-19. So watch your award, speak to your relevant industry association to keep on top of what is happening. The Commission is basically ordering these changes with immediate effect. It was heard at 4 p.m. the other day for the hospitality industry and ordered before 5, and the new rules were in effect. So there's really practical stuff that the Commission is doing to try and introduce greater flexibility on that level. That's me on that. I'm happy to field any questions.
That's great. Thank you, Stephen. Look, obviously there's all this information, and what we're just trying to do today was just give you sort of hit the high spots. Maybe if you stop sharing screen now, Stephen, if that's okay. Hit the high spots in relation to some of the grappling with as business owners at the moment that, obviously we're speaking to our clients on a day-to-day basis.